load of video. Which it is.
Munson, O Canada, okay. Trudeau, Clark, Bennett.
A busy schedule can sometimes throw your body.
Webster is next on BCTV.
Good morning. The famous leaked memorandum during the First Minister's conference predicted that the fight in the country would get very rough if Trudeau proceeded with unilateral patriation. Well, it's beginning to get quite rough now. And there was a scene in the House of Commons yesterday in which the Tories used a good piece of self-defense to stop the talking. This is what they did. In the first segment of the program this morning. But we've other business to do today too. And one is to meet the man who is the Premier, the government leader of the Yukon Territory, Chris Pearson. I'd like to know where they stand or if they're being truly ignored in this constitutional crisis. Apart from that too, a man I've wanted to get on the program for some time. A man who is key to Labour peace in British Columbia. His name is Don Munroe, and he is chairman of the Labour Relations Board of British Columbia. And in case you're planning to do any drinking and driving this weekend, which you shouldn't and mustn't, I've got two people who are involved in the provincial government's renewed Operation CounterAttack. Dr. Herb Parkin, who is an emergency physician, and Ron Boyle, who is the director of CounterAttack. But first, to give you the highlights, and what we're going to plan to do to cover this very, very rough fight in the country over Trudeau's repatriation of the Constitution unilaterally after the break. Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau has a personal deadline of July the 1st next year to bring back all ribboned and parceled the Constitution the way he wants it. Resulted this, the first application of closure on referral to committee resulted last night in a very bad scene in the House of Commons. Here's Jim Munson of CTV.
Moments after the last speaker rose in this controversial closure debate, Conservative MPs jumped to their feet demanding that they be heard. Speaker Lloyd Francis seemed shocked to see a number of the Tories surround the Speaker's chair, angrily waving their fist and shouting, "We have the right to be heard." Shouts of totalitarianism, Confederation is dying, and this is tyranny.
This line must be drawn now. This is tyranny. We don't draw this line on the destruction of Parliament now. It'll be too late. Authoritarian government. Totalitarian government. We have nothing here at all.
Not since the days of the great pipeline debate will such drama and bitterness been present in the House of Commons. Francis called for order, reading the rules of the House, and told members to go back to their seats and take part in the scheduled vote. While all of this was going on, House of Commons security guards were summoned to the chamber's doors, ready to escort MPs outside the House, but it never came to that. In the end, the Liberal majority easily defeated the Conservative amendment. The main motion was passed, and this controversial constitutional proposal is now on the way to a parliamentary committee for what's expected to be more stormy sessions. For the Conservatives, who feel they have been denied their basic rights to speak on this issue in Parliament, it's now another opportunity to make their case. The divisions in this debate have become so deep that while Prime Minister Trudeau might have his own timetable in bringing home the Constitution, there is no doubt the Tories intend to fight this unilateral patriation action with a passion that hasn't been seen in Parliament in recent history. And in many respects, the arguments over the future of Canada have just begun.
And with the NDP under Broadbent's leadership soundly in bed with the Liberals, they seem to have accepted the packet holus bolus. The Tories are on their own. Clark is at his best in the House of Commons. But before Clark spoke yesterday, we had a chorus of O Canada from Conservatives alone, and here's how it sounded. Canada, we stand on guard for thee. There are three other significant highlights I want to show you from yesterday's confused crisis. And one was the press conference with Prime Minister Trudeau, the man who said some time ago that separatism was dead in Quebec. Now he's asked about the possibility of separatism in the West, and he says...
Is it irresponsible? I don't want to make a value judgment on that. I just don't believe that it's a very frightening threat. The chances of Western separatism are absolutely nil and inexistent. So what? Canadians are Canadians, and I don't think they'll fall for that kind of thing, except as bargaining tools by their premiers. Maybe the Westerners should take a leaf out of Quebec book and scream as much for more for the West, but then get into governments in Ottawa and scream for more at that level too, rather than always sit in the opposition benches.
The Prime Minister, believe it or not, also said, if you want more representation, scream more, shout more, and elect more Liberals. He failed the last time on that. Clark in the House of Commons made an impassioned speech about the democratic process. Here is Joe Clark.
This government, by its actions, this Parliament, by acquiescing in closure, is poisoning the atmosphere in this country, and we will not have a solid constitution emerge from a poisoned country.
I hope you have that. I couldn't hear it. Premier Bennett on the West Coast had his particular reaction to the overall position now with Trudeau and his unilateral repatriation. And Mr. Bennett seemed to be, I don't quite know what he seemed to be. You can listen to Keith Ferrer's yourself and decide what he means.
This morning there were no fires of separatism in Western Canada. I've said the reason I'm asking for a conference is I want to be the firefighter. Right now I am the firefighter in those fires, and at the present time Prime Minister Trudeau is the arsonist.
Who knows who is right in this, but I'm going to tell you what we plan to do next week. The budget comes down on Tuesday. McKechnie will deliver the Liberal budget in the House of Commons on Tuesday afternoon. Lalonde will deliver the energy policy. Now, to cover this properly for the West Coast and not to have to rely on eastern versions of what's happening, we are setting up a satellite transmission from Ottawa to Vancouver. And at 9 a.m. Vancouver time, we will have on the air, to be tackled by me, Finance Minister McKechnie, Energy Minister Lalonde, Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, perhaps, if all goes well, Leader of the Opposition Joe Clark, and perhaps even Premier Bennett, although we will have, I'm quite sure, a conservative social credit spokesman to give his immediate reactions to the energy policy, the natural gas tax, or whatever is coming in that particular package in the House of Commons on Tuesday. Always bear in mind that Lougheed said that certain things would amount to a declaration of war, that Bennett says that Trudeau is the arsonist and that he, Bennett, is the firefighter. Now, the Liberals may be setting us up with great extravagant rumors about a natural gas tax on natural gas alone at the export level, which would certainly be a very big financial blow to British Columbia. And depending on the oil policy, what is done there, a very big financial blow to Alberta. Don't let's panic about it. Let's wait till the budget Tuesday night, see what in fact comes down, and then Wednesday morning, in a first ever satellite broadcast of this type, from Ottawa to the Webster show on the West Coast, we're going to give you this selection of political figures. McKechnie on the budget, Lalonde on the energy policy, Trudeau on the budget, the energy policy and the Constitution, Joe Clark or Crosby, and maybe both of them, and a spokesman for the provincial government. That'll be next Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. precisely. It is going to be a rough fight in the country. How much the rough fight is between the politicians in Ottawa and the politicians in the provincial capitals, and how much is between the people in the East and the people in the West, still has to be judged. We don't know what the provincial governments will do. We do know that there's great opposition in certain parts of this country to a number of factors in Trudeau's repatriation bill. The Charter of Rights, the lack of finite detail in the equalization payments, the fact that this particular package is going to have to be approved by the British House of Commons and not by a Canadian House of Commons. The slight possibility of some kind of Western or referendums by Alberta and British Columbia, perhaps even touching on the separatist point of view, as in Quebec, because after all, Trudeau told us this morning himself, if you want to get something done, scream and shout and whine. And then the government in Ottawa pays more attention. All for this morning. Next, you're going to meet a man who is in fact the Premier of the Yukon Territory, Chris Pearson, after the break. My interview now is with Chris Pearson, who is in fact the Premier of the Yukon Territory. How long have you been Premier of the Yukon Territory?
Well, I'm the government leader, Jack. I'm not a Premier because we're not a province. I perform the functions of a Premier in Yukon, and it's been 2 years now.
Very elementary question, but many people don't know. You now have most of your self-government in your own hands.
That's correct. To all intents and purposes, save and except for the delivery of health care and a Solicitor General, we do have all of the self-government powers of a provincial government.
I didn't see you down in the First Minister's conference screaming for to become the 11th province, screaming for your particular brand of constitutional change. Why were you ignored?
We don't know why we were ignored. We weren't ignored by the Conservatives, but we were certainly ignored by the Prime Minister and the Liberal government. I was screaming. I was very happy to hear the Prime Minister say last night that if you're not happy, you should be screaming and hollering from the West. We've been screaming and hollering for a long, long time. We just haven't been able to get in yet.
Yeah, no, but how many? You're a Tory, you're a Conservative.
Yes, that's correct.
How big is your house?
16.
How many are Tories?
11.
What, the other 5 are what?
There's 2 Liberals, 1 New Democrat, and 2 Independents.
Oh, there are a couple of Liberals elected in the West outside of Manitoba.
Yes. Oh, yes.
But you don't count because you're not a province.
That's correct.
Now, what kind of budget do you have?
Our operation and maintenance budget is about $200 million.
$200 million. Is that mostly handouts from Ottawa, or do you raise it by taxation?
Oh, no, we raise a lot of the money by taxation, but again, the major difference between a territory and a province, or a colony and a province, is we don't own the resources in the territory. They're developed by the Government of Canada, and as a consequence, we don't have any means of raising revenue in respect to resources. We don't own any land. And so, yes, we function on what is called deficit grants. We like to call them transfer payments because we feel that Ottawa has to pay those to us.
Yeah, until you don't have the right for taxation on any of the royalty levels at all that British Columbia does, say, for instance, with coal or with natural gas.
That's correct, but we do have the right of taxation for everything else, everything but resources.
How many people live in the Yukon?
25,000.
25,000. What could it hold properly developed under a good Tory government which became a province, eh?
I would guess, Jack, that within 15 years we're going to be in the 100,000 range.
You called yourself a colony, really. Would you call it a colony even if Joe Clark was still the Prime Minister of the country?
Oh, certainly, no doubt about it. And in fact, Joe Clark, when he was Prime Minister, recognized the fact that we were a colony and was making moves to alleviate that. It was just a pity that he didn't have more time.
Now, do you expect to be given land grants, the Yukon Territory, when it becomes a province, if ever, eh?
Oh, I think it will become a province, Jack. I'm quite confident of that. I don't know when, and we're not in any real great hurry for it to become a province because I think there have to be some rules laid down. It's one of our concerns with the lack of our participation in the constitutional talks. There's just nothing there that recognizes that Yukon and the Northwest Territories exist.
I wonder many people watch Webster in the Yukon.
Oh, a great number. Your show is shown live in the morning and again at midnight, and it's a very popular show.
Whitehorse especially, I should imagine.
Oh, yes, yes.
Now, because what I want to do is, you've had a fair amount of political trouble since you came into office,
oh, I don't
Government
think so.
House Leader.
I don't think so.
How many cabinet ministers have you got?
5.
How many cabinet ministers have been involved in public brouhahas?
1.
Which have caused just 1?
Sure.
Oh, I thought it was more than 1.
No, not at all. 1 has been involved in a public brouhaha. In fact, you interviewed him at one time, Grafton Najutli from Old Crow.
Oh, he resigned after being
That's
involved in a fracas, as we say.
That's correct.
That was 1 who were left. Any others? Didn't you have another one who quit rather than meet the conflict of interest rules?
Oh, but that wasn't any kind of a public brouhaha. He came into the cabinet at my request, knowing full well that he had 6 months to meet the conflict of interest rules, which in my opinion are ludicrous, and I'm hopeful of getting changed. But that wasn't any kind of a public brouhaha. It was just simply a case of he was required to sell his business, and he had 6 months to do it. He couldn't do it. He had to resign, or else he was outside the law.
What about, wasn't there another man who resigned? Something to do with hunting or territorial game sanctuaries?
Oh, Sweet Hansen, the MLA from Mayo, was the Minister of Tourism, Economic Development and Renewable Resources. And no, it had nothing to do with the game thing at all. He resigned for personal reasons. He hasn't chosen to make those personal reasons known, and Jack, I don't feel I can.
No, I don't want you to.
Yeah.
Then you had another cabinet minister who offered his resignation and you refused to accept it.
Oh, good cause, that one. Good
What was
cause.
that one? That was something to do with a wiretap.
That's correct.
Mind you, we have them here too. We had a
Yes.
cabinet minister here who was wiretapped. Forget his name now, it doesn't matter.
Yes. Our particular cabinet minister happened to be the Minister of Justice. It was an interesting situation. And in fact, a report from the special committee that we established in the House was tabled yesterday. And that report is quite revealing. It is the opinion of the members of that special committee of the House that in fact our privilege as a House was impeded upon by the RCMP.
In other words, wiretapping a cabinet minister's phone without any authority whatsoever, or was there authority to tap the phone?
The report indicates that the committee does not feel that the RCMP have to have authority from the House, but what they have to do is advise the Speaker that any member's phone is tapped. It wasn't simply, it wasn't because he was the Minister of Justice, but it was because he was an MLA.
Yeah, and he actually offered his resignation and you refused to accept it.
Yes.
Nor would you accept it.
Of course not.
In these circumstances, what the RCMP do get a bit big for their boots at times, don't they?
Oh, sometimes, but we get along with them quite well in Yukon. They're very, very important people to us in Yukon.
I'm going to try a chancy experiment, Mr. Pearson. We're going to open the phones. We'll only get one more segment, but let's open the phones and see if we get anything out of the Yukon. We might get some interesting questions to the House Leader of the province. So we'd collect calls from anywhere in the Yukon to any of the numbers which will flash up on the screen now, Gladys, and we'll see if we can do a local television show with Chris Pearson, the Government House Leader of the Yukon Territory, after the break. Looking at my blank board, Mr. Pearson, I better amend my telephone rules on this early morning occasion to make it any Yukoners, is that what you say?
That's what we are, Yukoners, yes.
Or people in Yukon to try any number. They can call collect from the territories too. Is it easy to DDD Vancouver from up there?
Oh, yes. No problem, Tom.
No problem.
No problem.
Now, you, in fact, I remember you being introduced as if you were at the First Minister's Conference, because you weren't. What happened there? Did you send your double?
No, I didn't. No, in fact, I was in Victoria enjoying some beautiful BC weather at the time. The Prime Minister invited me to attend the First Minister's Conference as an observer, along with the mayors of some of the municipalities in Canada and so on. And I did not feel, I'd been at First Minister's Conferences as an observer before, felt completely frustrated because I did not get a chance to, quote, represent, end quote.
No, but you could only have been an observer. You couldn't have spoken.
That's correct.
Well, after all, you aren't a premier anyway. You're just a government house leader.
And being at them as an observer, I found that I can watch them better and get more from them if I watch them on television. So that's what I did.
You're not confused by the backroom chat and double talk. Here's a call from Whitehorse to Chris Pearson, the government house leader. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Pearson, I'm calling from Whitehorse. I'm wondering what representations you've made to the federal government to date regarding the constitutional talks on behalf of Yukoners, specifically on behalf of Native Yukoners, although I'm not a Native Yukoner.
Oh, we still have not been able to make any representation to the federal government. They simply are not interested in hearing from Yukon Territory. It's as simple as that. We have made representation to the Standing Committee of the Progressive Conservative Party, who asked us for our opinions. Those opinions, of course, have been well voiced in the territory. But as far as to the federal government, nothing at all yet.
What do you want, though?
Well, we want...
And do you, how many of the 25, how many are natives compared to the white man?
About 1/3 of our population is native or native extraction.
Right. What do you want? Just, do you want straight provincial status, ownership of resources?
No, not at all, not at all. What we would like this Constitution to do, the proposed Constitution to do, is take cognizance of the construction of the Alaska Gas Highway Pipeline, especially in respect to the mobility clause, in that it is going to make Whitehorse another Fairbanks if we're not careful. The other major thing is that we feel very strongly that Yukon and Northwest Territories should be recognized as entities in Canada now. They weren't recognized in the first BNA Act because they didn't exist.
But you're perfectly aware of the fact that until they settle native land claims, it's almost impossible to make a decision as to the government of the territories.
Oh, but we're not going after provincial. Provincial status is a long-term goal. It's a long way down the road. We've been saying
should the Ottawa government settle the land claims now or just drag them out forever?
Oh, no. Land claims are our #1 priority. We have been negotiating for 7 years. The last 2 years that we as a government have been in office, we have made great strides towards a land claim settlement. And we're confident now that there's going to be one very soon in the Yukon Territory with the Council for Yukon Indians.
Yeah, but you're not making the settlement. Ottawa will make the settlement.
That's correct, but we're very much a party to those negotiations.
Thanks. Anything? How's the weather in Whitehorse this morning? Oh, he's gone. Couldn't tell me. From Rosedale, BC, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack. Mr. Pearson, I just want to offer my congratulations to Mr. Pearson and the people of the Yukon for the hospitality they extend for us Lower Mainlanders, that when we go up there to visit, it is utterly fantastic.
I thought Pierre Burton was the only one who ever went up.
Oh, not so, Jack. Tourism, our second largest industry.
I went up by bus, went right across the Alaska Highway, and saw it all, and it is fantastic. And I would like to say to Mr. Pearson, just hang in there, and you're going to be recognized.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Jack Webster?
Yeah, where are you speaking from?
Whitehorse.
Yes, carry on to Chris Pearson.
Pardon me?
Carry on.
Oh, Mr. Pearson, sir.
Yes.
What are you doing about alcoholism in the Yukon? Just the other day in the paper, they said that the federal government is taking all our help away from us. I'd like to know what you're doing about this. And could you please talk about it on television while you're on TV? I'd really appreciate that.
Well, what's the problem? You think there's too much drunkenness in the Yukon? Hey?
Pardon me?
What's the problem? Are you concerned about the level of alcoholism in Whitehorse?
More help now. And I'm quite worried about this. And in the paper it says, well, we can go play pool. Where do you play pool? In the bar. And I'm just quite concerned what...
Okay, I'll take it up for you, and thanks for your call. How's the weather this morning?
Pardon me?
How's the weather?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Okay, thanks for calling anyway. I had them. You have a serious alcoholism problem, do you not, in Whitehorse?
We have a alcoholism problem in the Yukon Territory. I don't know that it's as bad as it's made out to be by statistics, Jack, because of our tourist industry. The facts of the matter are that the 25,000 people in Yukon hosted 300,000 visitors during the course of last summer. That means, it's inevitable those visitors, in fact, buy a lot of booze, and that's great for us. It's one of the major sources of revenue in the territory.
I don't try and blame the tourists for your alcoholism problem.
We end up with the worst statistics in respect to drinking in Canada.
Yeah.
Primarily because of that. But we also do have an alcohol problem.
Don't you have overproof alcohol?
Yes.
Isn't your alcohol much stronger than ours, so it won't freeze on the shelves?
No, that's...
Is that not true?
Why are you trying to perpetuate these myths? It's not any cold. It's very little colder in Whitehorse today than it is in Vancouver, truly.
No.
And, we haven't got any snow yet. It doesn't freeze all the time up there.
I've only been in Whitehorse once for sourdough days, but I remember the story, somebody telling me about this extra proof booze, because otherwise it would freeze on the shelves of the liquor store.
Yeah. We have one brand of rum that is sold is, in fact, an overproof rum.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, you just have the usual problem that we have down here, eh?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. To Mr. Pearson, this Constitution debate, I have watched it since it started on television, right from the House of Commons broadcast. Now, there was just Mr. Eberle got up and said that the Conservative Party had stuck to their seats throughout this debate. Now, I saw one member from Victoria, every time a Conservative come on, he was moving to get into the camera range to show them.
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. No, sure, he doesn't know what he's talking about either. Let's finish on a positive note. Do you think this constitution crisis can be solved without your participation because they ignore the territory in a reasonable manner in this country by July the 1st of next year, Trudeau's personal timetable?
I don't think so, Jack, because I think it is going to take more time to solve it reasonably. I really don't think it can be solved reasonably, meeting that very arbitrary timetable that the Prime Minister has set up.
One last word with you. Unemployment. If I was a young man wanting a job in the Yukon, unskilled labor, could I go up there right now and pick myself up as a job in a mining camp?
Yes, very likely, although, again, we do have, as the rest of Canada at this point in time, a very high unemployment rate. But jobs are available, and most people do find work in the Yukon.
What about rents? What about cost of living compared to, say, Vancouver?
Our cost of living is about 30% higher than Vancouver.
30%?
That's correct.
Your wages 30% higher too?
No, they're not. But the amenities of the country make up for some of that difference.
Mm-hmm. It's a tough place to live in, though, isn't it?
Oh, it's a great place to live, Jack. The only place to live.
My thanks to Chris Pearson, the government leader in the Yukon Territory. What do you call your assembly?
It's the Yukon Legislative Assembly.
Yukon Legislative Assembly. Thanks very much, Mr. Pearson.
Thank you kindly, Jack.
We'll keep watching in the Yukon. I'll be back with Don Munroe, Chairman of the BC Labour Relations Board, after the break. The climate and operation of the problems of labour relations in British Columbia changed dramatically when the BC Labour Relations Board in its present form was set up in what year?
73.
73. And with me this morning, just to get to know him a little bit, is Don Munroe, who is the chairman of the Labour Relations Board of British Columbia. Do other provinces have the same kind of boards with the same kind of powers, which seem to be quite strong, that your board has, Mr. Munroe?
Every province has a labor relations board. There are none others who have, or which have quite the same breadth of jurisdiction as do we.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about, when I was off during the summer, one big government union, I think it was the ferry workers, went out on strike, or they stopped work rather.
Yes.
And as I recall the skimpy superficial reporting of the occasion at the time, I was left with the impression that it's perfectly all right now for any union in British Columbia if it calls its work stoppage a political protest to down tools and go stand round the legislature. Now, am I right or am I wrong?
Well, that is a dramatic overstatement and thus a very incorrect statement. You have to appreciate that there are two documents, if you will, that govern the conduct of participants in the labor relations scene. They are the labor code, primarily, and the collective agreement. The labor code sets up certain minimum standards. On the one hand, an employer can't do X. On the other hand, a trade union can't do Y. Beyond that, it's free collective bargaining. And the definition of strike in the labor code absolutely requires, before it is a strike, that your motivation must be to extract a concession from the employer, your employer. Now, I don't want to talk too much about that particular case because it's still before the board, but if the motivation of a trade union is not that, or its members is not that, then it may not be a violation of the labor code, but it is perfectly open to employers and trade unions to agree at the bargaining table that the protection to the employer during the life of the agreement will be broader. So, for example, you have collective agreements which say during the term of this agreement there will be no strike or other forms of work stoppage. Now, if they negotiate that, then of course any kind of work stoppage during the life of the contract is in violation of the contract.
And that necessarily makes it illegal. If I belong to a union which says during the terms of the contract there will be no strikes or any other form of work stoppage.
Yes.
But if my contract has omitted to say, it only says there will be no strikes, but doesn't preclude any other form of work stoppage. If that's the way my contract with my employer is written now, can hypothetically I stop work and go lobby the government in Victoria and get away with it except for my loss of pay because I am not directly trying to get something out of my direct employer?
That's theoretically possible. I'd prefer to put it in terms of what you can't do. You cannot cease work if a purpose, not the, but a purpose, is to extract a concession from your employer during the life of the collective agreement. Let me give you a good example of where, you know, this is a very hot sort of debate, but let me give you one that might be a little less hot. Suppose you had an employee who was working under circumstances that might cause his trade union to say, you've got to stop working or we're going to fine you $100 a day. Well, he's between the rock and the hard place. He's therefore going to stop working, let's say. Now, would you call that an illegal strike? No, it's not contrary to the statute. He's not stopping work because he wants to extract something from his employer. He's stopping work for self-protection. Now, it may be that the collective agreement imposes a broader obligation on him to stay at work, but should the statute?
Don't lose me, though. Right. There was a strike in British Columbia whereby people stopped work, the ferries.
Well, you've begged the question when you say there was a strike. There was a work stoppage.
A number of ferry workers quit their jobs to protest politically.
Yes.
And it was not ruled to be an illegal stoppage.
No, it was not ruled to be a strike within the meaning of the labor code. It may have been a violation of the collective agreement. And that's something that's to be adjudicated or left to be adjudicated by the decision. It wasn't a breach of the statute. It may be a breach of the collective agreement.
In other words, the union leaders out there cannot now say to themselves, hey, the legislature is going to be in session, we'll say in January, and they're going to change the pension agreement, they're going to put a lid on pensions, or change the Compensation Act, or change some other broad statute affecting workers. These guys cannot now, willy-nilly, stop work to protest politically, or they face at least action under the contract by their employer.
Sure. If you're suggesting that every time the legislature is in session, people can down tools and walk over to Victoria, well, that's nonsense.
Nonsense. Good. But there may be cases where the Labor Relations Board Labor Code will not intervene.
The statute, that's right.
The statute. Good point. Here's the other one, and I'll overstate this again.
As usual, Jack.
Well, I think to keep it away from the Philadelphia lawyer type of explanation, you've got to get these things simple. Otherwise, we the ordinary reporters, get bamboozled by the double talk of the profession and the negotiators.
Okay, sure.
Next one. I have the feeling that there is a move by unions in British Columbia to attempt to ban all non-union work anywhere near where they operate. And you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
I'm talking about, what do you call these?
Non-affiliation clauses?
Non-affiliation clauses, as happened and may still be in front of you at Whistler. Now, can a union be given jurisdiction for a community and prevent, or a group of unions, and prevent non-union work in that community?
Well, you've asked a number of questions there.
Just take the one. Can a union be given jurisdiction for a complete community, not talking about a site, and prevent non-union people working in that community?
No, the community, that's not pertinent, no.
No, it can't.
No.
Even though they might like to.
Not by a collective agreement with a particular employer. I mean, if they go to the community and reach some contract, I don't know. But sure. No. But your opening premise made it sound strange that union workmen would prefer that other people were union. No. Well, of course they would. They see the presence of non-union situations, and I'm not commenting on the merits or otherwise, but they see the presence of non-union situations as undercutting the terms and conditions of employment for which they went on strike, or they see people picking up in a non-union setting the working conditions that they won during a hard-fought strike or the like. And, you know, I think it was back in the 1950s or so that a judge in the Supreme Court of Canada commented that anyone who thinks that union workmen will work beside non-union workmen willingly and without qualification has got his head in the sand.
Oh, I agree. I can see that. And that's why unions have non-affiliation clauses, which, correct me if I'm wrong, say we are not required to work on this job or in this industry with non-union people.
On this job, on a job. Work with.
Work with, yes. On a job.
Now that's in the construction setting. That's, in terms of the construction setting, that's the functional equivalent of the union security clause in the industrial setting. And in effect, it says, we're a union shop, we don't want to work with non-union people. And the employers, if they agree to that, then have given to them a contract provision which they may enforce.
That's right. In a plant or whatever, the union is protected by the fact that everyone within that plant must be a member of or join within a specific period of the union.
If they're able to negotiate that from the employer.
If they have it in their contract.
Right.
Whereas in the construction industry, which goes from place to place, they have instead negotiated the right not to work with non-union people on the same site.
That's right. Exactly.
But then we come to the question of when you have battles between different types of unions on the same site, which you have not yet resolved yet. But we'll talk about that with Don Munroe, Chairman of the Labour Board of BC, after the break. Don Munroe is Chairman of the Labour Relations Board of BC. Before I do anything else, Mr. Munroe, how big a bureaucracy are you now?
We're not a bureaucracy. We're a very streamlined administrative organization, Jack. We're a chairman, 8 vice chairmen, 14 part-time members with an administrative staff of 35. Let me compare that with the Ontario board that has a lesser workload, lesser adrenaline pumping workload. They have a chairman, 13 vice chairmen, and 55 administrative staff.
Overall budget, including consulting fees for all the flocks of lawyers who work for you?
Just a little shy of $2 million.
$2 million. How are you getting on with the socializing in your office? I see you had to crack down last year. This is an attempt to embarrass you. A memo signed by your administrative officer. We have an excessive amount of socializing going on in the office. As well as being unacceptable from a job efficiency point of view, it is also highly distracting and disturbing to other employees, some of whom feel strongly about the need to eliminate it.
Where did that get leaked?
That got leaked on April 8, 1980, to all staff at the Labour Relations Board, signed by J. Barrett, Administrative Officer. Are they now keeping to the proper coffee breaks?
Well, I'd say Joe's doing a very good job. Very good job. I don't know. I don't know.
Have you seen the memo?
I don't know. I don't think I have.
Have you never seen that memo?
I doubt it very much.
Too many people hanging around the water cooler.
We're like any other organization. We've got the same problem. I see you've got a big staff out here. They're not doing a thing, Jack.
No, they're not doing a thing. I just couldn't resist bringing that up, pointing out the coffee breaks. 10 to 10:15, 10:15 to
I'm a
10.
rotten employer, Jack.
You want to make the work for the living.
I try.
Now, let's talk for a moment, because I've dealt with this with, what's the name of that CLC guy again?
Dennis McDermott?
Dennis McDermott. And with Munroe a little bit, and with the Building Trades Council. Duke Point. Are we facing a continued crisis between the industrial unions like the IWA and the Building Trades Councils when the IWA insist on doing a job within a Building Trades Council designated site? I
think we're faced with the necessity for ongoing discussions to avoid eruptions. And I'm able to report to you that as recently as yesterday I had discussions with representatives of both of those, and as a matter of fact another timetable of discussion has been worked out. I'm not going to predict labor peace between those two organizations. I think I can say that there's a genuine effort on the part of the leadership of both to reach an accommodation with each other.
It was hard for the public to understand that. There was a common site for the Building Trades Council on this complex at Duke Point. And then a contract was given to an IWA-type union, and when they moved in to build whatever it was, the Building Trades Councils walked off. Is that not right?
Yes, that's right.
But that was solved because the IWA just stayed there, didn't they?
Yes.
They wouldn't get off.
I'm not saying that was solved because, but as a matter of fact, yes, the IWA did stay there.
Did they defy your order at that time?
We didn't make an order against the IWA.
That was quite diplomatic.
No, there was no request for an order against the IWA, nor was there any legal basis for an order against the IWA. The issue was not whether the IWA could work there. The issue was whether the building trades could decline to work there.
And they were entitled?
Yes.
To decline to work there?
Yes.
Because they had the certification for the site?
Well, they had the non-affiliation clause that we spoke of earlier.
Isn't it awful? I can say this, I don't know what you can say. That you have one set of unions, in this case the Building Trades Council, who regard the IWA as virtually a non-union scab bunch by saying we're not going to work beside these people?
Don't think that it's fair to say that the Building Trades Council regards the IWA as a non-union scab bunch. The non-affiliation clause speak in terms of being able to decline to work with employees who are not members of building trades unions. Now, I don't think that the building trades goes anywhere near as far as you have.
Oh, no, I know they haven't. But, I mean, well, let me put it more modestly. It does seem a kind of shame that when these unions are in the same, have been in the same overall body, like the Canadian Labour Congress, that they can't come to an amicable agreement about jurisdiction.
All right, but let's remember this, that you know, you've got to consider the tenor of the times. At that time, in that particular geographic location, there was unemployment within the building trades at a very high level. Number two, you have to remember that the building trades were not seeking to withdraw their services from the employer of the IWA employees. They were not a common employer situation. They were seeking to withdraw their services from their construction employer, who was a subcontractor on the site. Thirdly, let's remember that their contractor employer agreed to that non-affiliation clause. Why? Well, I have to say that that non-affiliation clause, it is in the interest of the building trades, but it is also in the interest of their employer. To the extent that the building trades are able to utilize those clauses to gain work, they gain it for their employer. And, you know, there's that, it's a free contractual provision, and
but occasionally erupts to the mystification of the public because of the internecine warfare among unions.
I agree, and I think that it's critically important for the reputation of the trade union movement that it be resolved in the House of Labour as soon as possible, and I've told them that.
Is the Labour Relations Board, I always forget this, you have in effect the powers of a court and can make effective orders to be enforced by the courts, is that correct?
Yes.
How does that apply in picketing? Is it possible to tell me what the picketing laws are in British Columbia?
Well, I can do it in a minute or an hour, but first of all, you may not picket unless you're on a lawful strike. And if you're on a lawful strike, you may picket at the places of business of your employer against whom you're on strike, or at other places where he carries on business, or at places of business of an ally of your employer. Unless I'm forgetting something, I think that's a fair statement in
Are
capsule form.
secondary boycotts therefore illegal here?
Secondary
picketing. Secondary picketing.
Well, some would the picketing of an ally is, in a conceptual term, secondary picketing. It's picketing of an employer other than your own, so that's secondary. But the point of the ally doctrine is that some people may ally themselves with a struck employer by entering into arrangements with the struck employer to assist him in resisting the strike. So you may want to call that primary, you may want to call it secondary.
I understand that. What about strike breakers? Is there a law in British Columbia which prevents, other than management or supervisory personnel, the use of strike breakers? And if my plant is on strike, can I go out and hire people and bring them in?
Yes and no. You are not permitted to hire what is referred to as a professional strike breaker. And a professional strike breaker is defined in the Labor Code as being someone who is in the business of working during strikes and thus assisting employers in breaking strikes. We didn't want imported into British Columbia the kind of rather unhappy situation that was building in Ontario, where firms were being established for the sole purpose of breaking strikes with dogs and the rest of it. But no, if you want to go out and operate during a strike, hiring people other than professional strike breakers, there's no law against that.
No law against it, but are the pickets limited by law to the numbers of people they can have circling a plant? Is mass picketing illegal?
Numbers are not per se illegal, but if numbers produce illegal conduct, then the numbers of pickets can be restricted.
And does the employer come to you, or does he go, as he used to in the old days, to the court?
Well, when one is talking about criminal conduct on a picket line, or what we lawyers call tortious conduct, threats of violence on the picket line, then they go to the courts. If you want to know where you can picket, when you can picket, you come to the Labor Board.
And who you can picket.
And who you can picket, you come to the Labor Board. If you're talking about criminal conduct on the picket line, then obviously that's for the traditional courts.
How do you feel about the climate for the coming year?
I'm pretty optimistic. I'm seeing a growing appetite for consultation before confrontation.
My thanks to Don Munroe, Chairman of the Labour Relations Board of British Columbia. I understand a few things a bit clearer. I'll keep over-sensationalizing and over-dramatizing, of course, for the sake of clarity.
Why change now?
Oh, when's the decision at Whistler? The final decision at Whistler?
I don't know. We're working on that in a very community-related way. We've got people up there talking to all the people all the time, and Ron Bone's in charge of that, one of my vice chairmen, and you'll have to ask him.
Yeah, you've got the non-union problem to deal with up there.
All sorts of problems.
My thanks to Don Munroe, Chairman of the Labour Relations Board of BC. Thanks, Don. Next, counterattack. No boozing on the highways. After the break. There are some issues which are like motherhood. And I don't mean motherhood qua abortion. I mean straight, old-fashioned, ordinary motherhood. In other words, you can't say anything nasty about it. And that applies to Operation Counterattack, which is a program of the provincial government to prevent idiots from drinking and driving and maiming themselves and others on the highway. So before I introduce my guests again, I want you to see one of the new commercials for the fall season of Operation Counterattack. And you can run it in 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds now.
Two more victims of a drinking driver. This kind of senseless tragedy happens every day in British Columbia, and we are called to the scene when it's too late. But if someone had reported that drinking driver, we might have stopped him in time to save these innocent victims. So if you see a drinking driver, please phone your local police.
Drinking Driving CounterAttack. Help us stop drinking drivers.
That's an unusual commercial, probably true, but with me is Ron Boyle, who's the director of Counterattack, and also with me is Dr. Herb Parkin from the Royal Columbian, an emergency physician. And there's one little thing that jars me a bit in that, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm jarred, Ron Boyle. One, that guy's an actor, he's not a policeman, is he? Right. He's an actor, but he looks like a policeman.
Sure.
Did he not say at the end of that, if you see a drinking driver, telephone the police?
That's right.
Do you want all citizens in all cases of suspicion where somebody weaves across the line to stop and call the police and give the license number.
Right. That's exactly what I want.
In all circumstances.
Yeah.
Are the police going to cooperate with you?
And as far as they're able to do, they intend to do that in the way that they receive reports about any other crime.
I do not find the police, and I have a fair amount of public experience in this, very willing either to attend to accidents or to respond to phone calls from the public on a nebulous proposition that somebody in the car ahead might be drunk.
Well, I don't know whether that's a valid complaint. We don't have any data on that. We know that the police ask for the cooperation of citizens to report any crime that they see.
Are the police going to put extra cars on or extra people on to carry what could be, and I'm not knocking you, I'm being deadly serious, a great rush of calls?
If a rush of calls occur, they'll take them in appropriate priority. They will attempt to do what they can to control crime and to investigate.
Yeah, I know, but you're not really telling me anything. I know perfectly well from my experience that if I called the police now and said there's a car, I think his license number is 5T36942, that guy weaved a bit, he could be drunk.
Sure.
You know what the policeman will do?
Well, I suspect that if the call seems legitimate and there is a patrol car in the area that can respond to such a call, they will make the call.
Well, the Vancouver Police Department, for a start, disposed of its traffic accident squad for about 10 years.
Yeah.
I know it's only recently brought it back.
That's right.
They have not been enthusiastic about following up accidents at all. Would you agree with me on that?
That's probably so. That's probably so.
However,
it's a matter of priority relative to manpower, other issues, you know. From my point of view, drinking driving is the greatest issue we've got.
Oh, I agree with you entirely, but is that commercial, does it not give a false impression?
I hope it doesn't, Jack. But you see, there is a perception. You called the problem, the issue of drinking driving, a motherhood one. I suspect there's a heck of a lot of people around that don't accept that point of view, that to drink and to drive is my right.
Oh, no, I didn't mean that. I meant the other way around. It's something you cannot attack, is the campaign which tries to stop drinking and driving.
Yeah, in terms of words, that's true, but in terms of behaviour, people drink and drive. And
well, the answer, of course, is to lift. If there's a drinking offence, take the licence away for a year.
But they do that sort of thing.
No, they don't.
But people drive when they don't have a licence.
I met a guy the other day who's driving with about 80 points and 90 points.
Yeah.
Obviously a bad driver.
Right, yeah.
Nobody's got guts enough to say if you're involved in a homicide or a serious injury while you've been drinking, you've lost your licence for life, have they?
Oh, yeah. If you're charged with criminal, you know, it's quite possible for that sort of thing to occur.
Can't remember a case where a licence has been lifted for life. I think the judges are too soft, don't you?
Judges pass sentence with all the evidence before them and with all the details in front of them. They make an individual decision. That's our principle of law.
Not good enough, really, is it?
Well, I don't know what the alternative is, Jack. What
to
is
be
it?
tough.
Yeah. Our principle of law is that you're innocent until you're found guilty.
All right.
And you develop.
I'll give you another one. If somebody gets picked up impaired and gets 30 days in the bucket, how do they serve the sentence?
It can be served in any way within the law at the discretion of the judge. It can be served intermittently, on weekends. It can be served totally.
Do you think this is punishment enough to bring the severity of the offence through? If I merely have to report to a Cala on a Friday night, or to the Provincial Correction Institute down in Marpole and spend the day sitting reading a book on Saturday and Sunday, and that knocks 3 days off, and I do that, if I'm very good, I might only do it for 20 days out of the 30.
Yeah.
I mean, is weekend imprisonment enough of a deterrent for a bad drinking driver?
For a bad drinking driver, I don't think there is a deterrent. That is, if the person has a drinking problem to the extent that he repeatedly drinks and drives, the problem isn't just drinking and driving, it's his whole lifestyle. And weekends in jail, lifetimes in jail, don't seem to affect that behaviour. You know, there are other things that have to be done, I think.
Well, I'm with you all the way. Don't misunderstand me.
I realise.
I'd like to put a practical application because I know that recently in North Vancouver, when the police arrested somebody for impaired, it was 5 or 6 months before you came to trial.
Yeah.
Now that's terrible, isn't it?
It is, and it's not unusual.
But doesn't this weaken your counterattack?
I'm not convinced, personally, that the severity of punishment. I think that you're on to an important issue for me. Immediacy of dealing with the behaviour is important. But when you've got such a volume of this type of behaviour, how do you cope? Do you want that many policemen? Do you want that many courts? Do you want that much litigation?
The very point I was making about your commercial. Phone the police. 100 people will phone the police, get no action, then phone me and tell me they had no action.
The thing that we're trying to do, I think, in this, behind the whole of this, is that the problem isn't just me as a policeman, it isn't me as a court, it's everybody's problem, and everybody's got to get involved to solve it.
I'm with you all the way. I hope people phone the police. I hope they know what they're doing when they phone the police, and I hope when there's drinking involved and somebody reports the accident, the police attend promptly.
The Vancouver Police, the municipal forces, the RCMP have been involved in the development of this storyboard for television commercial.
Good.
They've issued directives around this campaign saying, you know, to the dispatchers and so on, it's our problem and we're getting support from the public. Help us.
Ron Boyle, Director of the CounterAttack Program of the provincial government. Next you're going to meet a doctor in a commercial and in the studio, not a commercial, in a message, and in the studio after the break. Dr. Herb Parkin, an emergency physician from the Royal Columbian. Do you like yourself in the commercial we're about to see?
It's hard to tell yet. I've only seen it 3 or 4 times.
Is this the first one you've done?
Well, I'm always looking for a second career, and maybe I can get off working nights now.
Yeah, maybe you can. I'll give you a job in the morning. We're going to watch Dr. Parkin's message, and then we're going to talk to Dr. Parkin and Ron Boyle after this.
I'm an emergency physician. Every weekend, I know I'll be here trying to save someone's life, the victim of drinking and driving. I now have to go and tell this girl's parents there's nothing more we can do. But there is something you can do. If you see a drinking driver on the road, call your local police. Your phone call may save the life of an innocent victim. Please, phone.
Drinking Driving CounterAttack. Help us stop drinking drivers.
That's better. I prefer the delivery from an emergency doctor. I mean, this is purely a personal choice. But you obviously mean it, and I suppose you do mean it. And you say, if you see a drinking driver, for God's sake, call your local police.
Well, there's no doubt about it, Jack. You've been involved in this for 10 years. You do get the gut feelings that are required to attack it head on, and I've been very interested in this particular problem because I have to deal with this referred incident all the time.
In other words, even though that is to some extent play acting, it's play acting with the truth.
Yes.
And you've got to tell the parents who are waiting outside what's happened to the member of their family.
Yes.
Must be heartbreaking.
It's the hardest job that I have to do, and that's, as you say, you get hard no matter what, and accustomed to whatever job you do, and I have not ever been able to get by the feelings that are brought up by having to go and tell the parents that their teenager or father or husband just been killed in a car accident.
May not be a fair question, but when somebody comes in as a result of a motor vehicle accident, how often do you smell liquor on their breath, happening to know that they're also the driver?
Well, we did a study about 18 months ago now with the support of CounterAttack. It was a unique study done in Canada for the first time, and it was an attempt to measure the amount of alcohol that was found and frequency of in people who were involved in car accidents and were only injured. There are lots of studies that show that about 45% of the people who are killed have been drinking, and about 35% of them are impaired, but no one had measured the injured rates. And we discovered over a 6-month period of time that about 35% of the people had been drinking, and about 25% of them were in the impaired range. And this actually was lower than we had a gut feeling for. We knew that on Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, when we're working in the emergency department and a multiple injuries accident gets brought into the emergency, at least one of the drivers is going to be smelling significantly of alcohol, and often it impedes our management of him, and you know, complicates, of course, the medical care. But we see that as a very big role, have always seen that as a very big role in the emergency department caseload.
Yeah, so among the caseload, 35 have been drinking and 25 are more than 0.08.
Now, this was a voluntary study, realize.
Oh.
We had to go to each one of these people, and if you were drinking and driving, if you ever combined those two and came into our emergency department, I would have said, now look, I'm going to be able to protect you from all the laws that are in effect in British Columbia, because we had the support of the government organizations. Well, there's no way that I was able to convince the drinking driver who'd been, say, the cause of an accident or involved in an accident that this was a study that was not available to the authorities. There's no way. So there's a subgroup that were left out of that study. But we were able to gain, believe it or not, about 90% of the people.
Cooperation.
Cooperation.
Now, when you come to, when a victim of a traffic accident comes into hospital now, you obviously can't give him a breathalyzer. Can you take a blood test against his will?
For medical purposes, unless he refuses that, specifically, you have to realize that we take blood for many tests. And one of those tests, and often is very useful, is a blood alcohol test. We want to know how, if this person is unconscious, is it because he's been banged on the head, or is it because he's been drinking, or because he's done a bunch of phenobar before he came in, or whatever.
So therefore, you've got to, in fact, to manage, as you say, the patient, to find out what his blood content is in various things. If you went to take a blood test for the specific reason of finding out if he had been drinking, that would be against the law, I presume.
If we were going to if we were going to use that and give it to the police, make it available to the police for prosecution, then he would have to have his consent.
I see, but if you're going to take it for management of his case, you can take your routine blood test and check the alcohol.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he would have to know. So the police are not entitled to take blood.
No.
Except from a dead person, perhaps.
That's done really through the coroner system.
Well, that's a coroner system. That's not your system.
But this is another aspect, of course, and this has been supported and recommended by the British Columbia Medical Association, and in the fall by the Canadian Medical Association, that the law be changed, that people who are involved in motor vehicle accidents give up a sample of their blood so we can measure alcohol and drugs.
You approve of that?
Sure, I've been supporting it. We've been pushing it for some time. Look, as you say, the motherhood issue, everybody knows that everybody's down on drinking and driving. What's wrong out
when they're sober? When
they're sober, and they have got money for a taxi home. But if the public was aware, I mean, everybody's against the problem. If the public was aware about how big the problem was, how immense the problem was, this is where the breakdown is. We get what we deserve as far as our laws and as far as our government is concerned. It's because the public is not informed, is not aware of what's going to happen. Do you know that if you go out driving Friday night, say from 10 to 2 in the morning, every fourth or fifth driver on the road
is impaired?
Impaired.
Hold your breath. We'll do another segment, a short segment with our friends from Operation CounterAttack after the break. Back to Ron Boyle, the director of the CounterAttack program. What about these Batmobiles? I remember them being knocked severely because they didn't operate properly in cold weather. Have you overcome that problem?
I think so. It was a legal issue in the courts, and courts have different opinions. In reality, the breathalyzer works in low temperatures. It is whether there is enough room for a defence against the working in cold weather or in rain or in hot weather or whatever. So it's really not an issue.
That's when I talk about the Batmobiles, I mean the mobile breath testing units.
Yes.
How many do you have?
We have 14.
14?
Yes.
And they move throughout the province, I
They're
presume?
sited in each region of the province, and they're deployed by the police.
Now the law at the moment is that if you refuse to blow, you can be charged.
That's right.
And that's almost an automatic conviction, isn't it?
Yes, unless you have a good defence for not doing it, but there aren't many good defences.
And what's the level at which it's supposed to be impaired?
It's over 0.08, over 80 milligram in 100
80 milligram in 100
milliliters of blood.
Now, is there any plan by the provincial government that you know of or that you recommend to toughen up the treatment or speed up the treatment of those charged with drinking and driving offences?
The law enforcement system is looking at more effective and more efficient processes of doing it. But of course, it has to work within the law system. There are all sorts of recommendations and discussions going on now about, from the point of should it be a criminal offence at all to drink and drive, to the point that it should be a criminal offence to drink and drive at any level. Those are the polarities of the view. I think we've got to be practical. I think that for a lot of cases we should treat this as bad driving behaviour, and we should deal with it efficiently and quickly as bad driving behaviour to some extent. That is, let's deal with it as bad driving behaviour under provincial law that says that in the same way that speeding is bad and these other things, drinking driving is very bad. And we take your licence, perhaps we take your wheels away.
In some European countries the level is 0 or 0.05.
0.05 in
Sweden?
a number of countries.
No, Sweden has no drinking.
Well, no, they all have a level of some kind.
What do you think, Doctor? What would you make the level? What would you do? Obviously sincere about your approach to it, because you deal with the end disaster. What would you do?
Well, the problem is so large and so immense that there are weaknesses all the way down the scheme, right from, education of the drivers to especially the young. Realize that the impaired 16 to 17-year-old has 175 times the probability of being killed as the unimpaired 16 to 17-year-old. I mean, there are figures like this that are just 175 times. We're not talking about percentages. These are immense numbers. And okay, you got to educate about drinking driver. You got to educate the public. Got to educate the drivers as they learn to drive. We've got to teach them how to drink and drive separately, but they're both learning these at the same time. That's why they have such a high death rate.
Just a minute. If I've got one teenager here, 16, 17-year-old boy or girl who doesn't drink, and I've got one over here who does drink.
Yes.
The chances of the drinker being killed are 175 times greater.
Yes.
What a difference.
You realize that in British Columbia, from the age 16 to 24, represent about 47% of the deaths in British Columbia?
16 to 24.
This is a young people's disease.
It's also the same applies to the ratio of damage and insurance claims.
Well, sure, it works all the way down the road, and long-term disabilities. Go and take a look at the people who are lying on the neurological wards with no functioning. Take a look at the people in the spinal cord units who have spinal cord injuries and are really non-functional.
You don't have to be impaired to get into that kind of accident or that kind of injury, do you?
No, but it helps.
You mean it increases your chances considerably?
Very much so. The figures, I mean, we're talking about numbers of times. If the drinking driver in the 30 to 34 is still in 26 times increases his fatality. Okay, anyways, all the way down the road, sorry. All the way down the road, there's got to be a correction in every stage, through the courts, through the laws, everywhere, throughout. And until a blanket approach is taken through and corrects all the inadequacies all the way through, we will continue to have a failure in dealing with the drinking driver. The statistics for 1978 across Canada are the same as they were in 1971. There has been no change, and then we can add up the millions of dollars that have been spent on counterattack programs.
Might be a lot worse if the millions hadn't been spent.
Very much so. Is it in spite of or because of?
Don't know. I can't possibly
But
answer.
the statistics are the same.
Do you wear your seatbelt?
Jack, I think I sent you one, didn't I?
No, you didn't. I only put it on long trips. Is that stupid?
What's a long trip?
From here to the ferry. Down at the store, I don't wear it. How are you doing on seatbelts? Is that part of yours?
No, it's not part of our issue. It's an obvious good safety factor. Can I deal with one point that Herb has made? We've taken data of alcohol-related fatalities in this province since the start of the program. And reported alcohol-related fatalities went down 19.5% at the beginning of the program, and that's been fairly well maintained for the last 3.5 years.
How many people do we kill a year?
Over 600.
In BC alone?
Oh, yeah, we tolerate 600 deaths a year. On
the
motor
biggest
vehicles.
age group are the young people.
Yes.
Did you ever formally learn to act, Dr. Parkin?
There's some question about that.
No, but did you ever go to acting lessons? How many times did you have to do this commercial before you got it right?
Well, it ranged up around 25.
Fair enough, because we're going to see it as we go into the break. Dr. Parkin.
I'm an emergency physician. Every weekend, I know I'll be here trying to save someone's life, the victim of drinking and driving. I now have to go and tell this girl's parents there's nothing more we can do. But there is something you can do. If you see a drinking driver on the road, call your local police. Your phone call may save the life of an innocent victim. Please, phone.
Drinking Driving CounterAttack. Help us stop drinking drivers.
On Monday, we've got something a little different, haven't we?
Yes, let's hope the Canucks win tonight and Sunday, because they're going to be here Monday.
Harry Neal.
And two bright ones.
One of my, we're going to find them, one of my favourite people, Harry Neal, don't know him very well, but he's literate and evocative. Don't forget the Best of Webster, Sunday night, 5:30 p.m. It's going to be Freddie Forsyth of Devil Alternatives. Don't forget the special satellite broadcast from Ottawa. News hour coverage on Tuesday, Webster coverage with Prime Minister Trudeau Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. precisely.